Hi everyone, Bear from Bear Reads Books. Welcome back to my channel, and it's BookTube prize judging time. So the quarterfinals, semi-finals, quarterfinals have just finished, and I'm not judging the semi-finals, so I get a little break for a couple of months where I can catch up on the reading that I would like to do. And it was just the last video, I was complaining just a little bit how the last quarterfinal read of Nonfiction was really difficult and just took up a lot of time. So I'm kind of thankful. While I threw my hat in the ring for semi-final judging, and I would have ended up maybe with a fiction pool, I'm kind of happy that I didn't get picked. So I just catch up on all the stuff. But anyway, what I'm here to do today, I'm here to give you my rankings and thoughts for each of the 6 books, and to talk about BookTube prize in general. And I think Robert again, shout out to Robert, who's done a fantastic job corralling all the judges, herding them like herding cats, really, herding cats. All these judges all around the world providing comments and changing their minds at what they want to do. It must be a big job, made even bigger next year when we go to an extra category. So not just fiction and non-fiction. I think the plan is to add, is it translated fiction? So maybe something really big happening next year. But we have to thank Robert for all of the hard work he does. Now, as I said, this was a tough one for me, and I fear that my rankings, having watched Robert's video early this morning, I fear my rankings are going to be very different to what a large percentage of the population and a large percentage of my followers and watchers of this video who are in the United States are going to be very different. So let me go through, starting at the bottom 6, working my way to the top, and I'll give my thoughts along the way. So, number 6 is Barack Obama, A Promised Land. And this got through. This got through to the next round. It's going through the quarterfinals. I think, for me, the problems I had with the Barack Obama autobiography, is a couple. For an Australian audience that aren't immersed in American politics, it's less relevant. And pulling apart your entire first 4 years of your presidency in minute detail, which is what this book is, and it astounds me that this is just the first term of his presidency. He's going to release a second book to get through the second term. That pulling it apart in such minute detail loses all of the power that it could have had. And for an Australian audience, as I said, that's not immersed in American politics all the time, this was really tough going, and it just felt no different than any other political autobiography, whether it be an Australian Prime Minister or an American President. It felt no different whatsoever than any other one. And I get that Obama as a president, being the first African American president, is important. Very important. And I think he did the best possible job with the Congress that he had. But that doesn't mean it's worthy of reading about in fractional detail. So that is why I put it at the bottom, number 6. American audiences would have thought very differently about it. And that's one of the reasons why this international BookTube prize, where you have judges from around the world, is so important, I think. So number 5 is another one that made it through, and that's Heather Clark's Red Comet, the biography of Sylvia Plath. Now this was really good, and Barack Obama's was really good and engaging as well. Red Comet even more so, and this is how I decided Red Comet over Barack Obama, is because Red Comet was so beautiful in how it was written, and it was so incredibly researched. Just reading it, the depth of research that had gone into this was amazing. And to have a person's life like Sylvia Plath, who has already had her life, her marriage, and her work, her art, dissected into a million pieces, both while she was living and since she has died, and to come up with something new and exciting and fresh and engaging so many years after the death of Sylvia Plath is an achievement in itself. And what's her name? Heather Clark has discovered new source documents, new stories, letters, poems, all sorts of things, writing of Sylvia Plath that she's included into this volume, and that makes this volume incredibly important to the overall work and dissection of Sylvia Plath's life and work. And for that reason, it's very important. But the things holding it back again are this minute detail where it's simply not required. And I think Brian from Bookish, who read it in the last judging period, summed it up well. He had it a lot further up the list, but remember it was quarterfinal time or octafinal time, so there were a lot of maybe not so good books in the pool. But this is now up against some incredible non-fiction books, so achieving and getting up to the top of the list is much harder to do. I'm not saying that Red Comet was bad. It was actually really good and very engagingly written, and with so much source material. The problem that I had with it is a couple. It's 1,300 pages. And all of the minute detail that you pull apart her life, the stuff that really has been examined already, we should just leave that alone, gloss over it. Because when you've got 1,300 pages, there's got to be some meat that you can cut off. The other problem I had is if you're not a fan of Sylvia Plath, or if you've never read any of her work before, a 1,300 page brick of a book is not very accessible. And I have read a little bit of Sylvia Plath, but not much. Not enough of her work to go, occasionally I forget her name. and I've read zero work of her husband. So I come from a very low base of knowledge about Sylvia Plath's work. And I think if you're coming at it from that level, it's a very dense volume to get involved in. And for all of those reasons, and on balance against everything else in the list, it ended up at number 5, which is tough, I think, for this particular one. Number 4, I had Merlin Sheldrake, An Entangled Life, the one about mushrooms and fungi. And having read Robert McFarlane's Underland, which is science and nature writing, this is of a really high standard, and I really enjoyed this. It was super engaging. You make mushrooms real exciting. Merlin makes mushrooms super exciting, and their place in the world. I feel like I know mushrooms intimately. And I'm not being flippant here. It was a very, very good book, but it is just one of those ones where you're trying to think of the 3 that go through, and on balance, what do you leave out? And between number 4 and number 3, so Merlin Sheldrake and what I'm going to say next, it was a really, really tough decision to which one is going in, which one is stepping out, and between 3 and 4, it was a really tough decision. There was nothing particularly wrong with Merlin Sheldrake's book, and it reminded me the last time I was able to travel, and we were in Europe visiting my wife's family in France, and we went to the underground caves, the mushroom caves, and you can go right down into these caves where they still commercially grow mushrooms, commercial volumes of mushrooms, and in that same space is a mushroom museum deep in the earth, and it's quite incredible. But yes, it's a super engaging volume of work, and really interesting, and really of a standard like Robert McFarlane's Underland that I loved last year, that it deserves praise. But on balance, in this pool, number 4. Which leaves number 3, which is the tussle that I had in my head between this, between the Merlin Sheldrake and this one, and it is number 3, which is in Rebecca Giggs' Fathoms, which didn't make it. Neither did Merlin Sheldrake, but Rebecca Giggs also didn't make it. Fathoms is about the whales, and when I first started reading this book, I thought, this is a bit too sciencey for me. You're talking, you're not engaging me with a great story. It started off with this fantastic story of the author finding a decaying and rotting whale on a beach, and the people that came from all around to stare and gawk at it and poke sticks at it and let their dogs sniff it. That was super engaging, and then it dove straight into a lot of science. And very early on in the book, I thought, maybe, but after that, it thoroughly just enraptured me. Like, it just took me in from there. And the science became mixed up with the feeling you get, and why we feel like we need to protect whales so much. And it talked about the Japanese relationship with whales and their cultural desire to continue to hunt whales. So I don't think they went as far as justifying their hunting of whales, but they certainly left it in the sphere of it's a cultural activity, which I'd never actually thought of that before. I mean, they'd always done it under the guise of science, which we all know is probably a bit of a ruse. But then a lot of the science that Rebecca Giggs discusses in this book comes from Japan. So that was just one aspect that I got out of it. But really, the style of writing was beautiful. So all of the magic and the mystery behind whales, their activity, their song, their migratory patterns, all of that same sort of ocean ebb and flow is reflected in the writing, and you just felt like you were drifting along with the whales as you read. It's hard to explain, but it's quite magical. So that was number 3, Rebecca Giggs' Fathoms. And number 2 also didn't make it. That's Francesca Wade's Square Haunting. Now, I thought this was amazing. I would love to hear other reviewers' reasons for leaving this one out. Was it simply because the really big tomes felt more important and you needed to go to the top? Or am I missing something? The tale of 5 women that lived in and around this square in London, and all creative people. So some of them were essayists, novelists, thinkers, writers. They all revolved in very similar circles, and in fact some of their lives intersect. But the 5 women's lives in this square where they at one time in their creative lives lived is just brilliant. I mean, as a different take on a biography, this is great to pick 5 women that you may or may not have heard of. I mean, some of these characters, some of these 5 women I'd never heard of at all. And when they laid out part of their biography and what brought them to this little square in London to do their creative work, was incredible. It was so eye-opening to me that this little square could be the centre of so much creativity in the early part of the 20th century. It just thoroughly wrapped me up in it, and I can't recommend this enough. It was absolutely astounding piece of work. That is Square Haunting. I think the tales of 5 women. Yes, and since then I've put some of these women and their writings in my TBR, because some I had heard of but never read, and some I had simply not heard of. So I'm going to search them out and read them, because all 5 of them sound just incredible, amazing, strong, intelligent, creative women, and I just can't say enough about it. It's so good. Square Haunting, which leaves number 1, which did make it through, and I'm going to explain very clearly why it made it through for me, and what the difference was to all of the other books. There was no doubt for me that Our Bodies, Their Battlefields by Christina Lamb was number 1. And there was no doubt for me that Square Haunting was number 2. And the reason why these 2 books ended up at the top is because I felt when I read them and when I finished them that I had finished something or participated in something that was important and that was worthy of everyone knowing about. And I didn't get that impression 100% about the whales or about the mushrooms or about Barack Obama or about Sylvia Plath. I didn't get that impression. What I got the impression from our number 2 pick, Square Haunting, and from my number 1 pick, Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, is that this is a work of such importance that everyone should read it and that everyone should get hold of this book and tell everyone about it. And more so than Square Haunting, Our Bodies, Their Battlefield just excruciatingly blew me away. The stories in it are at sometimes horrifying and very difficult to read. They're incredibly graphic. But they're stories of women in war and how women's bodies are used as weapons in war. Weapons of intimidation, weapons of abuse, weapons of control, and we're talking about children, women, wives, mothers, and I just, at times I had to put the book down because I was overwhelmed with emotion or overwhelmed with the story, with the graphic nature of the story that I just read. But when I got to the end, and after so much of stories of these women, I feel like it's just such an important piece of work that everyone needs to get a hold of this book and everyone needs to read this book. It is quite simply amazing. And Christina Lamb is not new to this territory. She's been writing about this subject, either as long-form journalism or books, for many, many years, about the plight of women in battlefields and in war. And so she knows this very well. And this book seems to be a collection of many, not all, but many of the places that she has been and the things that she's experienced and the interviews that she's done. And it's not done chronologically. It's not done by region. So at one point we could be visiting a country in Africa, and then a country in Asia, and then a country in Europe, and then we could go back to Africa. So there's no real rhyme or reason of how the order of the chapters goes, but each one is powerful all on its own. It's almost like you finish one chapter and you so desperately want to keep reading because it is that good, but you also feel the need to just think on it for a bit and close the book, take a breath, have a rest, think, and then kick off again, because each chapter is quite harrowing, goes to a different part of the world and deals with a different group of women who have been, women or girls who have been abused or have their lives torn apart by men in conflict. It is quite simply astounding, and I can't speak highly enough. I don't know how people ranked this pool. I haven't seen any other judging videos for this pool yet, so I don't know where Christina Lamb has ended up on everyone else's judging. But for me, it was a no-brainer, number 1. And I don't care what anyone else says about Obama or Sylvia Plath or where you think those things should have gone, but Christina Lamb has to go at number 1. No doubt whatsoever. And I haven't read enough of the rest of the pool left to know that Christina Lamb should be number 1 or win the entire thing, because I don't know yet what else is left, and I haven't read enough of what's left on the list to know whether it beats it or not. But as a standalone or as part of this pool, it was amazing. So that's it. That was Group C in non-fiction for the octafinals. What went through, as I think I've said already, was Christina Lamb's Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, Barack Obama's A Promised Land, and Heather Clark's Red Comet. So those are the 3 that have gone through to the next round. My judging, very, very different. I think 1 out of 3. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully my opinions haven't upset anybody, but I've done them in good faith and I've done them in good humour. And we'll see what the next round brings us. I'm looking forward to having a break for a couple of months from booktubing. So you'll see more videos from me just about my normal reading and getting about habits. So maybe I can read some stuff that is on the BookTube list that I've got on my shelves that I don't need to judge and I can talk about, but also read some Aussie stuff. I must call out, and it's certainly not the reason why it ended up in my top 3, but Rebecca Giggs' Fathoms is the only Australian author in the list this year, as far as I'm aware, and it's in non-fiction. There was none in fiction and one in non-fiction. Certainly wasn't a consideration to leave her as number 3 on my list. It was good, certainly good enough to be in the top 3 anyway, but she was the only, and now bowed out. So that's it. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, wherever you may be, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.